All right, this video is going to be the first video for our talk about our specific immune response. Our specific immune response is also called our acquired or adaptive immune response, many names for it, but that's because that's one of the big features of our specific immune response. So whereas our non-specific responses were just that. They were non-specific. The natural killer cells, the neutrophils, phagocytosis, inflammation, all the ones in the last video series are not specific for a particular pathogen. That means phagocytosis will happen whether you're infected with E. coli or COVID or salmonella or Ebola or heck, maybe pollen, right? An allergen that gets into your system. Okay, inflammation. It doesn't matter if you step on a nail, if you've, cut yourself with a nail file, whatever the case may be. Inflammation is going to happen no matter what the cause. And that goes for pathogen invasion, other ways as well. So those processes are going to happen no matter what is going on, what has caused it. And they are processes and cells that we're born with. They are constantly circulating in the body, looking out for trouble. And so they have a very quick response time because they're always on the ready. And so that is very different than our third line of defense, this specific immune response, because this immune response is specific for specific pathogens. So one thing that we're going to talk about is going to be antibodies. We have antibodies unique to E. coli. We have different antibodies unique to salmonella, different antibodies unique to COVID, assuming you've been exposed to that. So we call this our acquired immune response because we acquire it over time. As you are exposed to different things, you develop this third line of defense. And so another important feature, I should say, sorry, y'all, of our specific immune response is that it has a memory, which our innate immunity do or does not. So it's not changing slides. Hold on. There we go. So some of this I just said. But our third line of defense essentially comes into play if the first two lines of defense aren't enough to either prevent or eliminate an infection. So the adaptive immunity, okay, as I just mentioned, it's specific to a pathogen. It is acquired over time. It has a memory, which is why we're not constantly sick all the time. Once we've been exposed to E. coli, we now have antibodies made and ready so that it doesn't take quite as long. We don't have to create them from scratch. But sorry, y'all. I'm trying not to cough this entire video. So once this immune response is activated, it remembers that pathogen. So we come into contact with pathogens all the time, but we're not sick all the time because of this memory component, okay? Essentially, once this third line of defense is activated, it's like, ooh, E. coli, yep, we've made antibodies for that. Hold on, let me go get them, and we'll quickly mass produce them. So that's kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about in this video series. So a quick recap from A and P, some of the key white blood cells that are going to be involved in this third line of defense. We have our dendritic cells, which are derived from macrophages. They are able to phagocytose pathogens. But not only will they ingest and digest the pathogen, they will present part of that pathogen as kind of like an indication that, hey, guys, look what I found. Here's this pathogen. I bet there's more in our body. We need to do something about it, okay? And then We're going to talk a lot about B cells and T cells. Once activated, B cells can or will differentiate into different types of cells, one of which is called a plasma cell. And plasma cells are going to be our antibody producing cells. So they are super duper important. We also have T cells that's once activated will differentiate into different types of T cells. We have helper T cells that are going to help activate our B cells and cytotoxic T cells. And those cytotoxic T cells will actually destroy infected cells. And so B cells are part of kind of one branch of our specific immune response. And the T cells are part of a second branch of our specific immune response. So we're going to talk about those two different branches momentarily. So to quickly remind you, we talked about these with our innate immune response. MHC molecules are going to be on the surface of self cells because remember, we only want our white blood cells to attack non-self cells, aka pathogens, although some will attack infected self cells as well. But the main point here is we do not want to attack healthy self cells because then our immune system is attacking us, and that's when autoimmune diseases arise. So we've talked about MHC1. That's what's on the presence of all, or I'm sorry, on the surface of all nucleated cells. So that's how our immune system can detect self cells. But now I want to introduce MHC2 molecules. They are only found on antigen-presenting cells. Those are the cells that can do phagocytosis and then present part of the digested pathogen to the rest of the immune response. Okay, it's sounding the alarm. It's letting the immune system know, hey guys, major problem. We need to start producing antibodies and things like that. Okay, so MHC2 markers are going to be found on those dendritic cells, macrophages, and B cells. Okay, those are our antigen-presenting cells. So y'all, let's kind of connect some dots here. Our antigen-presenting cells, so again, macrophages, dendritic cells, and B cells are going to have MHC2, but those are also self cells. They are nucleated cells. So those three types of cells will also have MHC1. Okay, so our antigen-presenting cells have both MHC1 and MHC2. All right, so some terminology that we did use previously, but just to kind of drive it home. Typically, our immune system is going to be looking for antigens, which are molecules on the surface of pathogens, okay? But antigens can also be on things like allergens and other things that can get into the body. They're not always infectious, but for the purpose of this class, we are going to be focusing on antigens that are alerting the immune system to problems, to foreign invaders, okay? So oftentimes proteins are going to serve as antigens because proteins are just really good triggers of our immune system. But there are pathogenic antigens that are large polysaccharides, but they're going to have very specific shapes. That way our immune system knows, hey, you don't belong here. Okay, but again, typically proteins, sometimes large sugary molecules. Other common ones are exotoxins, because remember, exotoxins are proteins, and they are what normally actually wreaks havoc on the host. And so if the body detects an exotoxin, that is a very quick way to activate our specific immune response. All right, so our specific immune response is a delayed reaction compared to our innate immune responses. Because it just takes some time to activate them, especially if it's the first time that we are encountering a pathogen, okay? So when we think about our specific immune response, we have a primary immune response and a secondary immune response. Primary response is the very first time you encounter that pathogen. So at that point, we don't have antibodies made against that pathogen because it's new. Right? So when we're like, ooh, hey, new pathogen, it's gotten past our first and second lines of defense, we need to create some antibodies. That's going to take some time. But then the next time we encounter this pathogen, it's like, ooh, I remember you. Let me just go activate those cells and just kind of mass produce the antibodies that we've already kind of got prepared. So the primary immune response is going to take more time than future exposures to the pathogen. So the two arms or two branches of our adaptive immune response is going to be the humoral response and the cellular response. Okay, so we're going to talk about these kind of separately because they're two very different components of our specific immune response. So antibody-mediated immune response, we call it humoral response for short, because antibodies are found in body fluids, once called humors. So we call it the humoral response. And then number two, cell-mediated immune response, we normally just call that the cellular immune response. So I want to kind of compare, contrast them a little bit right off the bat so that future videos will make more sense. So the humoral response is primarily going to focus on B cells. And they're called B cells because they mature in the bone marrow. Now, B cells are a type of antigen-presenting cells, and so they are able to do phagocytosis, again, and then they present that digested pathogen to the rest of the body. So we say that B cells recognize intact pathogen. Okay, then again, they ingest it, digest it, and present it. Once activated, B cells differentiate into different types of cells that we'll talk more about, but one of those types of cells is the plasma cell, which mass produces antibodies. Okay, so plasma cells produce antibodies, which is the key outcome of the humoral immune response, antibodies. Our cellular immune response, again, number two here, cellular immune response is what I'll typically call it, is all about T cells. And T cells only recognize antigenic peptides or fragments of antigen. In other words, it only recognizes what the B cells present. Okay, so the cellular immune response with its T cells recognize digested antigen. Okay, that's being presented by the B cells. And they release molecules called cytokines, which act as messengers to kind of get other things going on in the body. And so that's kind of the end goal of this cellular response, is to release cytokines. Now, the other thing that I've highlighted on this slide is that our B cells, part of our humoral response, is going after extracellular pathogens, pathogens that haven't invaded very specific cell types, but they're still in the body, and they will attack those pathogens. T cells are going to specifically go after intracellular organisms or pathogens. So viruses, which we know are not alive, so that's just a pathogen, not an organism. But then there are other types of bacteria like chlamydia that is intracellular. So B cells are targeting extracellular pathogens and T cells are targeting intracellular pathogens. All right, we're going to wrap up this video. It's gotten a bit long. But what we're going to do is dive in to these specific responses here in the next couple of videos. Let me know if y'all have any questions.